Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Sober Bliss Meets with me, Gail from Sober Bliss. And this week's podcast is really inspiring, interesting, informative, I hope, because I'm joined by my gorgeous friend, Laura. Laura Shuckburgh is a life coach and menopause coach, and she's come on today to talk to us about all things menopause, really. Hello, Laura.
Hi, Gail. It's lovely to be here to be talking about all things menopause.
I
My favorite.
know. I know. We've been meaning to have this conversation for quite a while now, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, and it's nice that we're doing it now because I think it always happens when it's meant to,
Yes.
a little bit like the menopause. But yeah, so I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you about this today.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be really well received, not just because it's been in the media quite a lot lately. So it's kind of a hot topic, but obviously, you listening to this are probably about that age where you might be approaching the menopause, already in the menopause, or if you're not yet, then as women, we all get there at some point in our lives. Um, and often, I mean, I don't know about you, Laura, but it's seen as this like mystical thing that happens and people don't really talk about it very much, a bit like our relationship with alcohol. Really, it's kind of not secretive in that way, but it's not something that we chat about often over a cup of tea with,
Yeah.
with our friends and colleagues. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about kind of what is the menopause and also perimenopause. I've heard of that as well. So if you could just explain what they are, first of all.
Yeah. It's interesting actually that you said we don't, because it is still, I think there's still a lot of shame around menopause. And also we live in a very ageist society. So I think there's a few different factors in the fact that we don't want to talk about it.
Mm,
And it makes us feel older, you know. I think when we were younger, we thought of menopause as something that happened to really older people, but now
yeah.
it's happening to us. And when I first went into perimenopause, I'd never even heard of it and actually did feel too young. So, what is menopause? Menopause it's actually only one day. It's the day that's 12 months after a woman's last period.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's just one day, which is like also very surprising to a lot of people.
yeah. I thought
So,
it was like years and years and years.
well, there's
But
different stages of it. This is the thing, you see. This
mm,
is why it's interesting to talk about it. So you've got your perimenopause, which you mentioned, which is the build up to the one day of menopause. And perimenopause happens usually in a woman's 40s. So, but it can happen earlier if you've had a hysterectomy, if you've had a surgical intervention, if you've had chemo, if you've had something, you can be thrown into an early menopause. But
mm,
most women naturally will go into perimenopause in their 40s, and they'll start to notice some of the signs and the signals probably about mid 40s.
okay.
And these
Okay.
can last for a good few years. You know, these can last for 4 to 6 years, the perimenopause stage. And this is when we start to feel different. This is when we start to notice changes. And it's a very unique experience, Gail. So for some women, they will sail through menopause and maybe not experience any of the signs and the impacts that other women will have, which for some women can be actually debilitating. And so
Mm,
then after menopause, that one day, you are then into postmenopause, and we are going to be living about a third of our lives and working through postmenopause, which the generations behind us didn't do because
oh,
it's like we are
yeah.
living much longer, so we are therefore living through our postmenopause in our postmenopause stage for much longer.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I've learned so much already. I had no idea it was just one day. This one day. Wow. Um, so you mentioned we start usually naturally, generally. Obviously each um every woman is unique, but round about mid 40s, we start to experience some of the signs and signals and symptoms. So I'm 46. what kind of things could I expect if I'm not already, I might be in perimenopause? I've got no idea.
Well, I think you probably are. Really, most women are in perimenopause, or you will be in perimenopause from 40 onwards. Because it's basically reason we go into perimenopause and then to menopause and then postmenopause is because our reproductive system is like, it's just like shutting down. Basically, it's kind of like switching off, and
Yeah.
it's the levels of estrogen and progesterone that are diminishing. And estrogen especially affects so many of our systems in our bodies. So
Right.
menopause can have a host of signs, and I've stopped calling them symptoms, because symptoms sounds like it's medicalizing it, and it's not a medical condition. Menopause, it's a beautiful natural transition, actually, that we will all go through. And
Yeah.
and I'm very much into kind of talking about the positive side, so perhaps we can touch on that. But
Definitely.
signs that you could expect to or to look out for, I kind of put them into two different kind of categories, which are physical symptoms and invisible symptoms and signs. See, I'm using symptoms myself, but I've been using that for a while, and I'm trying to change my sort of the way I talk about it. So physical things like hot flushes, night sweats, joint pain. And if you've never had, if you didn't know that joint pain was associated with perimenopause, would you ever think that the two were connected?
No.
So recurring UTIs can happen, vaginal atrophy, which is a dry vagina, or pain when you're having sex, or irritation down there, frozen shoulder. There's a host. There's about 48 symptoms and signs of perimenopause, and I've actually got a symptom signs tracker on my website that you can download, because if anybody is struggling with some of these signs, then it's really beneficial to start to track them over about a month, at least a month. So then if you do go and see a GP, you are armed with the right information about what's actually happening to you, because
a
lot of GPs are not trained in menopause awareness, and so are not joining the dots. And things like the invisible signs that you could be looking out for are anxiety that you might never have had before, depression, low mood or mood swings, irritability, loss of sleep, which is actually a physical one, but that's possibly one of the worst and most troublesome signs for working women these days, is this going to sleep, waking up maybe at 2 o'clock in the morning, not being able to get to sleep, and just having broken sleep and insomnia, and sometimes chronic fatigue. I remember when I was in perimenopause, I had chronic fatigue in the afternoon, girl, where I had to physically just stop and lie down, and I was lucky enough that I could, but so many women aren't lucky enough to be in that position. I don't know, are any of those, do you feel like any of those you might have, or is it just that you're lucky enough not to have any of them?
I don't know. Since I stopped drinking, and we can touch on kind of alcohol in the menopause a bit later, but my low level anxiety that I was feeling constantly, that's disappeared. I'm quite a generally upbeat person. I've got lots of energy. I wouldn't say that I was depressed, have ever been, certainly not at the moment. My sleep is pretty good at the moment, always has been, actually. I do get tired in the afternoon, but I've always hit like a 3 o'clock slump. And I remember when I first quit drinking, I used to have to nap at about that time in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Just for 20 minutes, half an hour even, and that was enough to kind of set me right for the rest of the afternoon. Right now, I do still get quite tired in the afternoon, but I started meditating for 15 minutes, and that really helps with the energy levels. So I don't know. I could just be one of those really annoying people who might just sail through it, because I've never had any issues with my period. In fact, I have to write the date down just so I'm not caught out because I don't experience any kind of anything really. It's just like, oh, I've forgotten about that when it arrives.
You're lucky. You're very fortunate, because I do think there is a bit of a correlation between if you've had sort of problems with PMS or like period issues and things that are happening around your menstrual cycle as to the way that you do transition through menopause. So I think I think there's quite a lot of research to be done there, but it is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't even touched on things like brain fog, which is such a common sign of perimenopause, when you just feel like your brain feels like cotton wool. It's much harder to retain information. It's much harder to do tasks that you might have done previously, forgetting things, writing endless to-do lists. And I think when you're working, or even if you're not and you're running a home, or looking after children and stuff, and all this is happening to you, it can really be quite a scary thing. A lot of women think they're kind of losing their minds. And also, one of the key issues with the menopause transition is that it impacts on a woman's confidence.
Yeah.
All this kind of systemically together, all of it can have a huge impact on the way that we feel about ourselves. And that's really important to notice that, but also to know that there's much that we can do about it.
Yeah. And I'd like you to explain or talk us through some of the things that we can do in a moment. But why do you do this wonderful work, Laura? And why do you approach it from, like you said, a positive, natural, wonderful part of a woman's life?
Yeah, it's a good question. That is, it's because I do it because of my own experience of having the most hideous perimenopause.
Mm-hmm.
I went into a very dark place, and that was about 5 years ago. And it had a massive effect on my relationship. This is the other thing with menopause, is that it doesn't just affect the woman going through it. It affects families, it affects children, it affects work colleagues. It's much more systemic. Again, I've used that word again, but it is. And that's where the knowledge that we're talking about it more is very important, because it's important that everybody around us knows that this is a transition. And sometimes, though, as a woman, we need to retreat to get through it, to sort of kind of find a way in amongst all this kind of angst and the way that we are being shown. Whatever way we go through our menopause, it's the right way for us, and there's lots of lessons to be learned from it. And I think that's what happened with me. I learned so much, and the reason I do what I do now is because I know the power of coaching. Because at the time I was going through perimenopause, I was also on a coaching course, but an organizational coaching course. Realized it was my kind of, I loved every aspect of coaching and the positive way, and that it can help people. And then because of what I was going through, I kind of naturally and organically started to help women in that way, because I knew I didn't want any other woman to struggle like I'd struggled. And sometimes that is just providing a coaching space like I do, can be just what it takes, as you know, with your coaching, with your clients, is that sometimes the power of coaching, until you've actually tried it, can be difficult to explain. But it is the most wonderful way for a person to open up in a very safe space and to get the support that they need, whether that's for alcohol or menopause or whatever the coaching is for. And that's why I do it, because I'm passionate about letting women come into their power at this time of our life, come into and help them to know what's possible, because there's so much is still possible. It's not the end of our life. It's just, actually, for me, it feels like it could be just the beginning. And I'm doing many things. It's like in Japan, they call menopause the second spring. And that's a beautiful way of thinking about it, isn't it? It's much more positive way of looking at it. Whereas in the West, we live in a much more ageist society, as I sort of spoke about earlier. And I think that has something to do with the way that we transition through it. We don't revere our elders and our wise people. We tend to revere youth. And I think and that's why we struggle as well with it when we're going through it here. And it's about sort of like releasing all that kind of negative narrative and thinking, well, actually, no, this is amazing. I'm coming into my power as a woman. And we've got to
Yeah,
give to the world, you know, with this power.
absolutely. I love that. And it's so similar to, the sober journey, because again, society and culture tells us, that sober is boring, it's difficult. What I had a podcast interview with Anne Dowsett Johnson yesterday, author of Drink, the intimate relationship between women and alcohol. And she said she thought that sobriety is where fun goes to die. But like, you've just been saying about the menopause, it's the opposite. It is a new beginning, a lease of life. You do absolutely step into your power when you quit drinking. And in the menopause or after the menopause, if I get it right, it's a new way of living. As you say, it's not the end. It's, the doorway to all sorts of wonderful things.
Yeah.
In your own life included, because you are now, well, tell us what you're doing with your life now.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I left the UK in lockdown, because I was in
Yeah.
a marriage that I wasn't really unhappy. I had a very lovely husband and I had a very lovely life on the outside. But there was always something inside me, this little whisper that I sort of talk about it as though it became a scream, and it was just, I wasn't happy. I wasn't living a life that was aligned with my values, which I now know. And my top value is freedom.
Mm.
And so eventually I decided that this wasn't working for myself and my husband after trying very hard to make our marriage work. And so in right at the end of 2020, I set off on a midlife adventure. Really. I left my marriage, packed up my car and my little dog and a bike, and set off to a village in France where I knew nobody, and just thought, well, it's kind of now or never, and just drove thousands of miles in search of this new life, which I had no idea how it would look, but I just knew I had to do it.
Wow. That's so scary and exciting, Laura.
I know it was really scary, because I also, another one of my signs of perimenopause was driving anxiety that I never used to have before. You know, I
Oh.
was always used to drive all over the country, and then all of a sudden, and this is not uncommon, just started to get panic attacks at the wheel. Literally would have to pull over, sweating palms. And I occasionally still do get it now, but I've got techniques to manage it.
Mm.
And oh, it's awful. But anyway, I set off and found a village in France to live in. And to cut a long story short, I've stayed in France. I'm now a resident of France. I've bought myself a camper van motorhome, which I live and work from as a digital nomad, I kind of could be called.
That's
um,
so cool.
it is really cool, and it's yeah, it's just living differently. And I couldn't afford a house, but I wanted something of my own, and I also wanted to
Mm.
travel. I've got my motorhome, and yeah, it's a bit of a journey, but for me, it feels to me now that the things that I'm scared about or fearful of, you
Mm.
know, the things that are the things that I should walk towards or I should go towards. That's what I've learned in the last few years, and I think we can lose that in midlife.
Mm.
And with age, we can lose that kind of ability to think, well, I'm going to do that. I want to do it, and I'm actually going to do it. We can think we want to do things, but we can start thinking, oh, well, I should be doing this, or I should be living like this, or that's not what I should be doing at 52 or whatever. But who
Yeah,
says it's not, you know?
exactly. Exactly. And is that what you help, your coachees with when they come to work with you, that side of um this transition?
Yeah, because, well, I work, everybody's sort of different, but a lot
Mm.
of people I've worked out, at the crux of most of our issues, when we're feeling like we've lost our confidence, or we're at we're at a crossroads. Many women come to me when they're at a crossroads. Purpose becomes very important in midlife.
Mm-hmm.
Or, they're in jobs, they've been doing jobs for, like, high powered jobs, that they're working their socks off all day and they haven't got any time for themselves. And I
Yeah.
think you've got to create some time for yourself in menopause, especially. So self-care becomes massive. We
Mm-hmm.
have to look at what we're doing, our lifestyle. So um self-esteem and self-confidence, I feel, is like the root cause of most of our issues. If we've got any issues, most of us have got some. So we work a lot on confidence, mindset. We
Yeah.
look at nutrition. We look at movement and exercise. You know, we look at everything that's going to help you to thrive through menopause, because it's not just one thing. You know, HRT can help, but it's not a magic pill. It's
Yeah.
about assessing our lives kind of holistically and putting into place good practices, good habits, and actually looking at what we really want. You know, what is it? If there was no barriers and nothing in your way, what do you actually want from this second stage of your life? And to dream big, you know.
Yeah. Wow, that's such an important question. I'm going to write that down, and I want everybody listening to go away and answer that question, and then you can contact me or Laura with your answer. So just
Yeah.
repeat that question again, Laura. If there was no barriers.
If you had no barriers and it was possible, what would your life look like in a year from now if you had
Mm,
no barriers and nothing was in your way, or no limiting beliefs?
yeah.
It's almost like if I met you, Gail, in a year, or one of your listeners. It's a question that I do ask my clients actually. If I met you in a year,
Mm,
Gail, or like I crossed you on your path in Spain or something, or you saw me in France, and I said to you, Gail, it's lovely to see you. And you said, oh, Laura, it's lovely to see you. I've had the best year. And I said, oh, brilliant, Gail. Tell me all about it. And you just tell me that what you've done in your year that's been like what's made it the best year. And that's without kind of putting any barriers up or any kind of anything other than what is possible.
yeah. Wow. So that's your focus then, listeners, on your year from now.
Yeah.
Um, because that kind of exercise, that insight really helps us look inside to what we really want. It's that purpose you mentioned before, like why are we here? What do we want? And maybe that clarity around what the next step is and what's possible for us. I really
Yeah,
like that.
and I think that works. Doesn't that could work with sobriety as well? You know, because
Mm,
often when we're in any whatever state we're in right now, sometimes it's not easy to think about being in a different state, because
yeah.
you've got all this sort of negative inner chatter. You know, oh, I can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. But
Mm,
if you didn't have that and there was a completely clean slate, how would it look?
yeah.
And that's an amazing exercise to do, really.
It is, yeah. And I get people to do that from the sobriety point of view. Imagine that you quit drinking now, and where will you be? Or where do you want to be in a year from now? And I get people to focus on the feelings. Like, how do you feel? It's
Mm.
not just about, being hangover free or, your dream job. It's about how you feel, which is really powerful, I think.
Yeah, and it's and almost like can kind of sort of visualize how it would look and like where you'd be and what it would smell like. Because I think if
Yeah,
we can engage all of our senses, it
yeah,
becomes a brighter, more vibrant picture, and then actually it could be much more likely. It is much more likely to happen if you are visualizing it. I really love vision boards. Actually, a
mm,
few months ago, I did a vision board workshop, and I just think having something that you look at. I've done one a few times, and I quite often have it as wallpaper on my phone. You can do them on Canva.
yeah.
It's a really good kind of visual reminder of your goals and stuff and where you want to be.
Absolutely. Because if you don't look at them, then you're not going to go towards them, are you? They're just going
Yeah,
to be
exactly.
there as a dream as opposed to something that you're actively working towards. Um, okay, I think we've got off track a little bit, but it's all very exciting and relevant and important in this journey of life. But back to perimenopause, menopause. If somebody is experiencing something different about, what's gone on before, if they're not feeling like their old self, I suppose, and they suspect that it could be this wonderful transition, but even though they might not be feeling very wonderful about it, what can they do, Laura? How can they help themselves and get support that they need?
Mm. Yeah, there's lots we can do. We have agency to do a lot to help ourselves, and I think that's really important to remember, that there's always something that you can do. You don't have to feel like this is the end or be in a completely black hole like I felt, because when I went into it, there wasn't people talking about it. There's so much more talk of menopause now. There's so many more resources online. There's so many more wonderful people to follow, maybe on Instagram, and the specialist, etc., etc. So there's loads of help out there. That's the first thing. I would start by tracking your signs and your symptoms over at least a month. And it could be just noting them down, and also you then just when it's happening, what's happening. So you've got a picture. If you decide to go and see your GP, if you do decide to go and see your GP, always remember that if you're not getting the answers that you need, insist on a second opinion. Go and find somebody else in the surgery who knows about women's health and well-being, and go and see them.
Okay.
Be
Yeah.
your own advocate is really crucial. And then start thinking about how you can, even if you're like not in this transition yet, like even early, 30s and stuff, if you can start putting into practice healthy lifestyle options, then you are going to be in a much better place to thrive through this transition. You're going to be prepared. So I think it's all about future proofing our bodies and ourselves. So it's looking at exercise and nutrition. Are you eating the rainbow? Are you eating enough protein? Are you exercising? Are you moving? Are you getting out into nature?
Yeah.
And then all of the things like meditation was actually so important for me, and you've mentioned it already.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of people think they can't meditate, but there's so many wonderful guided meditations. I use something called Insight Timer, and it's free, and it's a practice. It's not going to happen. Your mind will wander. You're not going to sit there and not have a thought in your mind. It's totally natural, but it's a wonderful space to have, to just let yourself be. And one of the most crucial things, I believe, with menopause is to accept that you are going through it. Accept the transition, lean into the transition, because you're going to get much more out of it if you are leaning in rather than trying to pretend it's not happening.
Yeah. Embrace it. And
Embrace it.
yeah, lean in, as you said, and I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. Focus on what it's given you, as opposed to what you feel you might be leaving behind or losing. Would you say that was?
Yeah. Because there can be a lot of grief around menopause. Kind of the fact that we can't have children. So there's can be a lot of grief, there can be a lot of shame, and also, which is really fascinating, any of the shit that we haven't dealt with in our lives, excuse my French, that you've maybe been putting in a little box, like life events or things that have happened to you, all of that stuff, or that stuff that you've not accepted or that you've not forgiven, will all rise up in menopause. But what it's doing is it's a chance for us to deal with all that. It's about listening to what our bodies are trying to tell us. And the only way really to do that is to get a bit still, rather than doing so much like everybody. I know we've got to do and we've got to work, but actually doing some being and allowing ourselves some time to either retreat or to just practice some self-care is crucial, actually.
Yeah, it is. And it's quite similar to the sober journey, I suppose. There's a lots of, parallels, because when we quit drinking, all of that crap comes up. The stuff that we've been, drinking to forget or to hide or to numb out from, all of that comes up. We suddenly have to be able to cope with things on our own and find tools and strategies, and the self-care that's so important as well. And in terms of the menopause and alcohol, some of the things you mentioned earlier about poor sleep, lack of energy, tiredness, anxiety, depression, alcohol just compounds all of those things, doesn't it? So in terms of a lifestyle choice, or in terms of what you said before about having agency to help ourselves, then it makes sense, doesn't it, Laura, to not drink or to drink less when you're going through the menopause?
It totally does. Menopause and alcohol do not sit very nicely side by side. And
Mm,
I think there's a bit of a double thing there. You know, it's age. I think you would agree that our liver doesn't process alcohol as well as it did when we were younger. The older we get, I
yeah.
think that's true. And then so it's a kind of a combination of menopause and our aging process. But yeah, for sure, anxiety. In fact, Sunday I had a few drinks, and I have been on a sober curious journey on and off for the last couple of years. I did 4 months when I didn't drink at all, and I felt amazing. Skin was better, low level morning anxiety completely gone or much less. And then
Mm,
I had a few drinks with some friends. We went out, had a lovely time. I couldn't sleep properly. Woke up at 2 o'clock, couldn't get back to sleep. And then in
yeah.
the morning, I felt awful, Gail. I felt awful. I felt really anxious, a bit depressed. So
Yeah.
actually, yes, thinking about, I talk to clients about this, thinking about cutting down or eliminating alcohol is really important,
Yeah.
but not easy as well. You know, it's something that for so many of us, me included, you know, I've been drinking on and off since I was like 15, and it's
Mm,
been something that's been very socially acceptable, and not doing it is not easy.
yeah. Yeah. It's that whole, it's a stigma, isn't it? Around sobriety and around not drinking. It's seen as, oh, well, if you're not drinking, then you must have a problem or there's something wrong with you. Never mind the fact that it's a toxin, a poison, an addictive substance. So actually, if you don't want to drink it, then that's a good thing for your body. But it's so normalized. I think that's where the struggle comes from a lot. It's mindset, as you said before, and leaning into the good things about not drinking, embracing this new opportunity for life. And if you do it in the menopause, then, even better, I would say. You get twice the joy of this next stage in your life.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really something to consider is not drinking. And when you were talking there, I think it's amazing, really, isn't it, that it's like one of the only sort of, it's like a drug that's like almost like, well, it's marketed to us, isn't it? It's a drug that's kind of there for us to just take, and it's encouraged. And actually, if you don't do it, it's like, oh, what's the matter with you? It's,
Yeah,
you know, that kind of culturally ingrained in us. It's crazy, really. When you're just talking, then my mind was thinking it's just madness.
yeah, it is. It is. And from my point of view, I'm coming up to 5 years alcohol free now. So it's quite easy for me to not take any notice of that. And I do think that's one of the most important things that you can do is to come at this journey as a personal choice for you, and that it's important for you, and it kind of doesn't matter what's going on around you. You have to step out of where you're currently, or if it's not making you happy, and step into your own lane, your own space, realign, as you said, with your values, and focus on yourself. Again, it's the self-care that you were talking about. I think not drinking is the biggest act of self-care that we can show ourselves.
Mm-hmm. But isn't it weird that we just quite often just feel as though we can't do it, or we find it so difficult? It's very fascinating, actually, the whole sort of psychology behind it all.
Yeah, we think, oh, we're selfish if we put ourselves first.
Yes.
When really, if we don't put ourselves first, then not only do we suffer, but everybody around us suffers because we haven't got the energy to deal with what's going on because we haven't looked after ourselves
Yeah,
first.
so crucial. And I
Yeah.
think that's important when you're going through a sober journey, and it's really important when you're going through menopause, because you
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to have your own sort of oxygen mask on first, don't you, before you
Yeah.
can, before, literally, so you can be fully resourced yourself to be supportive to those around you. And most women are the supporters. They're looking after families. They might even be looking after the older generation, their mums and dads, caring a bit as well. And it can be so much to deal with. It can be, it can just literally be too much. And I think you quite often, another sign I had, and I know a lot of people do, is they become a little bit not selfish. It's like positive selfishness, when actually they just want to retreat, like I said, and not be very sociable, so whether that's even at work or actually in social situations, they just need to kind of cocoon a bit and look after themselves. And if we're not allowed that space to do that, or from ourselves, then I think we struggle a lot more.
Yeah, we do. And that brings us beautifully onto the next thing I wanted to ask you, Laura. You mentioned the word retreat and self-care before. You are actually running a gorgeous retreat, aren't you?
I am, yeah, I am. I've been wanting to run a retreat for so many years, probably for the last 4 years or so. And with COVID, etc. So this year is the year that I've actually created this amazing retreat. It's called Menopause Unleashed, and it's in France, and it's in June the 22nd to the 26th. And it's going to be a wonderful space for women to come together to be with other like-minded souls for connection. And we're going to be creating a menopause toolbox, so that you've got tools and tricks so that you can really thrive through your menopause, and with actionable things that you can take away for afterwards. We're going to be doing some walking wisdom, which is an amazing coaching in nature experience, where you will come away enlightened and with questions answered that you bring on that day. It's amazing. And then there's going to be things like meditation, mindfulness, yoga. We're going to do some wild swimming, Gail. I don't know whether you some wild swimming, which is meant to be, and it is so beneficial for our minds and for just so much. And it's quite popular, isn't it now, wild swimming?
Yeah, that's, I kind of do that anyway where I live, because we've got a natural spring as a local village swimming pool with fish in it.
Oh,
So
fabulous.
it's completely natural. So I suppose I take that for granted. But yeah, my son, actually, we were in England last week, and we drove up from Newcastle in the northeast to Edinburgh to get the plane, and it snowed on that day that we went up the coast. And we stopped at Druridge Bay, which is a really lovely beach on the northeast coast, the Northumberland coast. And bear in mind, it was snowing. And my son went swimming in the sea.
Did he? Fantastic.
Yes. And he came out and he was a bit blue and shivery, but he was just so happy. And, he looked blue, but alive at the same time.
Live and blue. Hopefully, we don't want to put anybody off, but it's not going to be that cold in France,
No,
hopefully.
it won't be. It
But
won't be.
it is. It's that kind of. I think it's about kind of putting yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone sometimes, and the benefits
Yes.
that brings. And I think that's, as well with like cold swimming, because I really don't like cold water. But yeah, after I've done it, and I do it quite often in France, I feel so alive. I feel so like,
Yeah.
wow. So yeah, I think it's a really nice thing to be able to put ourselves out of our comfort zone, but be supported within that. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a good opportunity for people who, if they've wanted to do it but have been scared to or haven't had the opportunity, it's a great chance to do it in safety with support on your
Yeah,
retreat.
definitely. And that's all. And I think that's something that I'm really trying to do more and more of. Connection for me feels like a really big word this year. It is
Mm,
my words, my kind of words of the year, because
mm-hmm.
I do so much on my laptop, but I'm really craving that human connection. And that's what I
Yeah,
think is going to be one of the nicest things about my retreat, that I'm going to be surrounded by some amazing women, and the
yeah,
power of that, because when women come together as a group,
yeah.
I actually think magical things can happen.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so it's in June 22nd to the 28th, you said?
26th. So it's
26th.
sort of 5 days ish.
Okay.
And
Okay.
there's an early bird on till the end of March. So I'm happy to honour that. And if anybody listens to this and it's gone past the end of March, it would always be worth just sending me a message just to see if there are any spots left.
Mm-hmm.
got a few spots left. I've got 4 places left, but I know they will go, and I'm really excited actually. Talking making me more excited about it.
Yeah. And am I right in thinking you told me this? It's going to be alcohol free as well?
It isn't going to be fully alcohol free, because I did
Mm-hmm.
toy with the idea of it being alcohol free,
Yeah.
but it's not being advertised with any alcohol.
Okay.
There is
Okay.
going to be a choice. If somebody wanted to have a glass of wine, when they go into Overtare or at dinner, then that's their choice. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, it's going to be, I'm not advertising it as something that's going to have lots of wine, because I don't want it to be like that. And I know that it's not good for menopause, but also I don't want that to take the choice away from people.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So we will put a link to all of the details about the gorgeous retreat. It sounds lovely, Laura. It really does.
Yeah, it's gonna be lovely. It really is. And it's interesting actually that you said about the fact that is it going to be alcohol free, because somebody else asked me that, and I have toyed with it being alcohol free, but I'm not. Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a
Mm,
tricky.
yeah.
I certainly won't be drinking, because I should be just facilitating and doing so much. But yeah, interesting.
But it's going to be a safe, nurturing space. So if somebody goes and they are alcohol free, then that's absolutely fine. I think
Oh,
that's
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. It's not going to be like a jolly with people getting
No.
absolutely. It's going to be none of that, because it's about creating healthy new habits, and what
Exactly.
we're going to be talking about is not having alcohol. So maybe it's going to be that somebody will come on that retreat and go away and think, well, actually, I really know the benefits now of not having alcohol,
Mm,
and
yeah.
how it's going to be much better for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Lovely. Okay, Laura, then. So just before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to share with us, especially if somebody's listening and thinking that, they might be on this menopausal journey already or about to be going on it, and maybe they want to know where to go next? What's the next step for them?
Well, I want you to know that you're not alone, and you don't need to be frightened of this. It's a completely natural thing that every woman's going to go through. And
Mm,
there's so much that you can do, as we've talked about earlier. So do reach out. Sometimes it's about asking for help. And I think we're not great at that either, as women, in the way that we live these days. And I think it's about reaching out and know that you're not alone. I offer a free discovery call if somebody's thinking about coaching. That can be sometimes just enough, to have a talk with
mm-hmm.
somebody in that safe space, as you probably know, and offer as well. And yeah, so go to my website. There's lots on there. If you want to reach out to me, I can always, if I don't know the answer to something that can help you, I can always point you in the direction of somebody who will,
Yeah.
whether that's a medical practitioner or a specialist or what have you, and start tracking your symptoms.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. And we put the link to that download that you've got on there as well on your website,
Yeah, that'd be great.
the symptom tracker um, worksheet. Brilliant. Well, thank you, Laura. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so excited to see what's next on this journey.
On this midlife adventure. Woo!
Yeah, it is a midlife adventure.
Oh, thank you, Gail. It's been lovely to talk to you. I love talking like this. I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I do hope it's been useful for somebody. And please know, this is what I'd like to leave you with. Just imagine
Mm.
if some of your best experiences are still yet to come.
Yes, absolutely. What's possible for you?
So
Yeah,
much, so much. I totally believe that. Could be
yeah,
just the start of something amazing.
yeah.